I raised a few hackles yesterday when I mentioned that Israel is unique among countries and that it's the only one that seems to have the expectation placed on it to justify its own existence. And that was seen, I suppose, as a vaguely pro-Israeli video to make. Now, I suppose I should, to be fair, even it out with a vaguely anti-Israel, or perhaps not anti-Israel, but a video that's vaguely critical of Israel. The subject that I'd like to touch upon is what we would call, it has a lot of names. I tend to just call it the future Palestinian state, or perhaps the present Palestinian state that has now been occupied, but a lot of people call it the Occupied Territories, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, whatever. Even that is kind of problematic, naming those pieces of land, those separated pieces of land. What are we going to call them? But what I'm specifically like to talk about is Israel's interference in these areas' sovereignty. And even more importantly, the settlements that are being that have been placed and continue to be placed in the West Bank in particular, and Israel's justification or even Israel's motive for wanting them. I can only think of four possible motives for Israel to want these settlements to exist. The first of them is the Eretz Israel thing, where a bunch of Israeli irredentists think that they should set up biblical Israel. I guess it's the kingdom of David or something, maybe the kingdom of Herod or whatever, with historic biblical Israel, i.e. big pieces of what are now Jordan, the West Bank, which they would call, I guess, Judea and Samaria, even bits of Lebanon. Now, I think that most Israelis would say that that's kind of that's the lunatic fringe. That isn't going to happen. The second motive would be to deal with Israel's surplus population. Israel is receiving immigrants from, the population, I think, is actually growing. The number of people moving to Israel is increasing. But I don't really kind of buy that one either, because there's still plenty of land to the south of Israel that you can settle people in the Negev area. I mean, it's not the nicest part of the country, but if you have to absorb extra people into Israel, I'm sure it can be done. The third reason, which is the only one that I can think of that might actually be a logical or at least self-justifiable reason for occupying and interfering in these territories, is security. Israel, if you look at it on the map, is this little strip of land along the Mediterranean coupled with the triangle of the Negev. And I can see how they might want to have a little bit of a buffer to absorb the initial shock of a hostile attack upon them from one of those countries that they're still technically at war with. They want a forward base. They want someone there to sort of act as their distant early warning line, on point, I guess, out there in case of a sudden attack, so that they can marshal their forces to meet whatever threat there is. Now, that strikes me as kind of illogical as well, although I can understand where their heads might be on that issue, because the only people that could really attack through the occupied territories are Egypt, through the Gaza Strip. They're at peace with Egypt, and that's just not likely to happen. A lot of Arabs, a lot of Muslims actually accuse the Egyptians of actually being in cahoots with the Israelis. And Jordan, which is the West Bank, and Jordan is also got, at least in terms of the Arab world, fairly non-hostile relations with Israel. And it also is not one of the stronger Israeli states, nor the most anti-Israeli or whatever. So I don't really think that really is meeting Israel's security needs. I don't buy that argument. But I can see maybe some Israelis in the back of their mind might think when it hits the fan, we're going to need as much space and elbow room to maneuver here. This is going to be a heck of a battle. But at the end, I don't agree. I think that good relations with a stable, viable Palestinian state is a much better guarantor of Israeli security, coupled with some sort of security agreement with the West, i.e. maybe even the EU or NATO, who knows. That would solve a lot of Israel's fears and would enable them to lay off the Palestinians. Finally, the only other reasonable, or I won't say that I agree with it either, the only other justification is to improve Israel's bargaining position in terms of the final settlement, which maybe some of them see as inevitable now in the Middle East. I think that it is inevitable. It's going to take a long time, but it's inevitable that peace comes to that region, because it'll be a peace of exhaustion, I suppose, like you have in Northern Ireland, but it'll be a peace nonetheless. And so they see that that's coming. One day we're going to have to sit down with the Palestinians. Whatever we do now to improve our bargaining position will mean that we'll come off better when the negotiations take place. Now that's, to me, Russian roulette. That's a very, very risky and inhuman game to play, if you ask me. I can understand why anyone would want to do it from the point of view of real politics, from the point of view of ruthless negotiations. But the ultimate pawn in this game are the settlers themselves, and the implicit in this is the fact that the Israeli government is willing, or may be willing, or maybe entertaining the idea of using these settlers as a stick with which to beat the Palestinians and then sell the settlers out. Now, this is something that say, in Northern Ireland, the Ulster Unionists have long suspected the British of wanting to do. It turns out with the peace accord, the latest peace accord, the British don't want to do that. But it's always been in the back of the Ulstermen's minds that the British will sell us out if it ever suits them. So I can see how the Israelis might want to increase settlement just to improve their hand when they sit down to finally do the really hard-nosed negotiating with the Palestinians, which is probably the beginning position, if you ask me, is the 1967 borders. Maybe they're hoping to get something more than that. I don't think that's viable, and I think that's the conflict will continue until they understand that that's just not going to happen, that they're going to get more than the 1967 boundaries. So anyway, I usually don't do political videos of this nature, but it is just something that interests me. Strictly from the Israeli point of view, what are they up to here? Why are they making so many people's lives a living hell? I don't believe that they're just plain evil. I don't believe that they're not thinking this through. They must have some sort of plan. Everything that Israel has done militates towards that position, that they do have a long-term plan. So I'm trying to figure out what that actually might be. Not an easy thing to do, because I find the Israeli position very opaque, and I find it very difficult to guess what their motives are as they play this high-stakes chess game, which is diplomacy, geopolitical military diplomacy in the region. I don't really understand what it is that motivates them in that particular area. Because the present situation is not only untenable, it's inhuman. We can't allow this to continue to happen to the Palestinian people. So the reason why I bring this up is how can we meet Israel's concerns in order to make sure that the Palestinians, their lives improve, they get their dignity back, they get their sovereignty back, and can get on with the business of living, instead of having to live in the world's largest, as many people have said, refugee camp, or even some people might say concentration camp. And at least maybe not in terms of the Second World War, but in terms of the Boer War, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip do kind of look like concentration camps. Just a thought. I'm not really taking a position on this, but it is a subject that fascinates me. Thank you.